What's up, Summoners? My name is Nathan Ng, and welcome back to another mid-patch update. Patch 11.15 is eventful. This series follows up on updates of patches and also provides new tier lists for you to work off of for all 5 roles. So make sure you stay tuned and let's jump into the content. But first, hit that sub button because it really helps us out. One of the champions that was nerfed was Gwen. Oh boy, her win rate has plummeted after this drop, but she still retains a very high ban rate. I'd argue she's somewhere between the border of S and A tier. The loss of early game attack speed was actually pretty huge. It's harder for Gwen to take fights, and in a lot more matchups, she's forced to concede the lane. While she still scales remarkably, enemy players have an easier time building up leads or using their superior laning phase to impact the rest of the map. Speaking of impacting the map, if you're still struggling to carry games, check out ProGuides.com. Our coaches can help you pinpoint what you can be doing better, and we also have a bunch of courses by pros like Afremu and Core JJ that you don't want to miss out on. But back on topic, Aurelia was also nerfed. Her W deals less damage, and their damage reduction was lowered. Although Aurelia's win rate has dropped, she still remains a top tier pick. Her ban rates in high elo remain over 40% as she's both mobile and deals high amounts of damage. It's a perfect combination to dominate lane as well as hard carry teamfights. Wukong has also received a nerf to his health regeneration. None of us expected that his win rate to drop this significantly, but for what the nerf was, it dropped a pretty decent amount, about 0.25%, but nevertheless, he's still an S tier pick. One of the bigger top lane changes this patch was to Kennen. His changes were quite literally shocking. His Q received a massive buff. They received more base damage as well as a slightly increased AP ratio. As a result, his win rate is nearly up a whole percent. That's huge, and he's finally managed to break the 50% mark. I'm sure as players get more practice on him, the numbers will continue to rise as he's not only just ranged, but he also deals magic damage. Kennen is still in the A tier, and we'll make sure to keep an eye on him as the meta develops. Next is the Mordekaiser buff. His W cooldown was not only reduced, but the shield as well. This was another massive buff that has helped Mordekaiser make a smooth recovery in light of the meta shifts. He's also retained his placement in the S tier. Although there weren't any balance changes, we moved Tahm Kench up into the OP tier this patch. Last patch, he was still rather unpopular. We knew for sure that he was at least an S tier pick, and now that we see his success is widespread, it's certain that he's at worst slightly overpowered. He has plenty of damage, a frustrating amount of sustain, and also provides decent utility for the team. Gradually, his ban rates are also on the rise, so make sure to not underestimate him. Accordingly, Set is down to the S tier. He deserves to be your next go-to pick if any of the OP picks are banned out or if you're more comfortable with him. In the case that any of the 3 OP champs were randomly deleted from the game, Set would still hold a spot in the tier. Our OP picks are Tahm Kench, Camille, and Aurelia, followed up by Riven, Mordekaiser, Fiora, Jax, Sylas, Malphite, Gwen, Wukong, Urgot, Shen, Mundo, and Set in the S tier. That covers up the top lane, so let's go ahead and talk about the jungle next. While we didn't have too many changes in the jungle, there were some pretty crucial ones. The first one was for Viego. He received a very minor damage nerf to champions, but more importantly, took a massive hit to sustain in lane. His play rates in solo lanes is a fraction of what they were in the previous patches. A lot of players aren't willing to deal with massive loss of sustain, and that's pretty understandable. Over the last 2 patches, he's lost 90% of his healing from Q on minions, so a bunch of his matchups aren't free like before. However, his power in the jungle still remains practically untouched, and his ban rate is still hovering around 40%. If you yourself think that Viego is still OP, remember that everything is subjective. I don't think your opinion is wrong at all. While we're keeping him in the S tier, that's only because our analyst values Xin Zhao and Lee Sin slightly higher than him. Since we're talking about Viego, I also want to ask you the question of the day. Do you think it's fair that some champions don't have a resource, aka mana or energy? Having one less thing to worry about has always irked me a bit, and while I do think that's something that you can balance around, I've always thought it was a little bit unfair, especially some of the champions that also have sustain. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Next, Nidalee has received some health to work with this patch. Off the bat, her high elo and overall win rates are up about 2%. She's much more forgiving than before, and you won't get one shot as often. Surviving with just a little bit of health left over means that you can either tough it out and win a close fight, or narrowly escape death, running away while you're on the verge of dying. For now, we'll be keeping her in the A tier. Shyvana has also received a buff this patch, decreasing her cooldown on her Q and also raising her AP ratio with it. The results are impressive, and her overall win rate is up 51% this patch. While in high elo, she's finally at an acceptable point with just below 50%. We moved Shyvana up to the B tier, and we're happy leaving her there. Our analysts are content with initial placements from the beginning of the patch. Thus, our OP and S tier picks remain the same with Xin Zhao and Lee Sin at the top. Following them are Viego, Elise, Evelynn, Fiddlesticks, Diana, Zac, Kindred, Kayn, Kha'Zix, Nocturne, and Shaco. Next up, we have the mid lane. First change that we'll recap in the mid lane is for Annie. Her Q's AP ratio was reduced by 5%. Overall, this has lowered her win rate by almost 0.5%, but she's still essentially the same pick. Although weaker than before, she still remains in the S tier. Aurelian Sol received a big nerf to his E's range. Roaming is a bit weaker than before, and his win rate in elite play has dropped a few percent. He will remain in our A tier. His numbers are actually solid, but his extremely low play rate really skews the results. Seriously, Riot, I understand why you nerfed him, but come on, there's like 3 Aurelion Soul players. Kayle received nerfs targeted at her mid lane strength. Her magic resistance was reduced and the damage was rather insignificant. In Diamond and higher, she's still pretty close to a 50% win rate. However, her overall win rate is still quite impressive, sitting at 53%. The play rate is pretty low for this figure, though it is expected to drop as the patch progresses. As a result, we're content leaving her with the current placement as well. Sylas was nerfed this patch, and our analyst correctly adjusted his placement from the OP tier to the S tier. The loss of W healing in return for Q damage was unfortunately a net loss of power. Especially because Sylas players were maxing out W for guaranteed damage and sustain, things have been a bit rougher on patch 11.15. His overall win rate dropped about 2%. Still, he's a pretty popular and decently strong pick, so the S tier seems appropriate for him. Cassiopeia is next, and she received some more damage on her E. Her win rate didn't go up as much as expected, but this was far from a small buff. It's increased it by about 0.5% at all ranks, putting her up about 51% in high elo. That's solid, especially given how she scales and also how mana hungry she is in the early game. Again, our analysts have moved her up to the A tier and are happy with the placement this patch. Now, let's talk about Syndra. The good news is that she got buffed. The bad news is that it didn't really do much for her this patch. I think she needs some more love because her stats haven't really changed all that much. After all, the only buff that they gave her was to her mana reduction. With the changes covered, we do have one shift to the list that we want to mention. Heimerdinger is up to the S tier. The cost reduction to Leandri's many patches ago definitely benefited him, and he's slowly on the rise. Players need to watch out for him because in some brackets, he's actually up to a 55% win rate. Whether you choose to run Exhaust to make any fight winnable, or Teleport to come back with full health after numerous trades, Heimerdinger is oppressive to play against. Players are using Conqueror on him for some extra combat power, and if you're unable to end fights quickly against him, he can do some serious damage. While Action is out, our analysts are still gathering information on him. We'll make sure to update you guys on the placement as soon as we can. Our OP picks are Zed and Katarina, followed up by Sylas, Talon, Annie, Fizz, Kiana, Diana, Ahri, Yone, LeBlanc, Kassadin, Anivia, Vladimir, Yasuo, Malzahar, Aurelia, and Heimerdinger in the S tier. Next up, let's cover up the bottom lane. There were only 2 bottom lane changes, so let's get through them. Caitlyn received a buff aimed at increasing her strength later on into the game. Her win rate has increased by more than 0.5% in high elo as well as at all ranks. It's a healthy buff that hasn't left her as an impressive laning phase god. The meta remains quite diverse and she's actually seen quite a decent number of shifts this patch in spite of this buff. Caitlyn remains in the A tier moving forward. Xayah received yet another solid buff. Her ultimate's cooldown was drastically reduced this patch. In spite of the change, her win rate remains rather low. It did increase by 0.5% though, so it at least helped. We'll be keeping her in the B tier for now. The first thing I want to let you guys know about is that there's a trending build for Ashe at the moment. Players are rushing Wit's End on her and then moving on to building Immortal Shield Bow. You can obviously pick up the mythic item first, but Wit's End provides a surprisingly big power spike. There's some extra mobility, magic resistance, attack speed, and on-hit damage. Since Ashe has a built-in attack speed buff with her Q, you can make use of Wit's End's bonus damage quite effectively. From there, you can build a Ginsu's for the Phantom Hit, and you can always build other items to complement this build like Runaan's Hurricane as well. Especially when the enemy team has a lot of magic damage or AP assassins, the combination of a shield bow and Wit's End does a solid job at keeping you alive as well. Now wrapping up the bottom lane, I'm here to tell you guys that Ziggs is up to the OP tier. He's absolutely crushing it, and especially because he's an AP bot lane, there's a ton of value. Maybe you have to pick up Ashe with Wit's End, who knows? Locking in Ziggs bottom not only confuses the enemy team, but it also lets your mid laner pick an AD assassin like Zed without having to worry about stacking up too much physical damage. It's insane because Ziggs' ban rate is actually up 12% this patch, and I didn't think I'd ever see this day. Thus, our OP picks are Samira, Ezreal, and Ziggs, followed up by Jinx, Kai'Sa, Ashe, Vayne, Jhin, Tristana, Draven, and Kog'Maw. Finally, we'll be concluding with the supports. Thresh received a big nerf to his E this patch. He's still going quite strong as the most popular support in the game. Not much of a shocker, and he's still on the border for OP tier. We do think that the 2 picks that we left there are still a class above him now, and we'll be leaving Thresh in the S tier. For some context, his win rate in high elo is down from 50.5% to almost exactly 50%. The big old robot Blitzcrank has received a massive buff this patch with some extra Q damage as well as some more armor. His high elo win rate shot up about 2% this patch, and I'm not surprised. Both of these buffs were huge, but put them together and what do you know, he's popping off. In case you missed our initial patch rundown, the armor buff is a huge deal for Blitzcrank not only because of his high base health, but also because he has his massive mana shield as well. There's a ridiculous amount of effective health gained whenever he has a base resistance buff. Blitzcrank remains in the S tier, but he's also on the border of the OP tier, so don't hesitate to pick him up or Thresh if you prefer them. One buff our analysts heavily underestimated was the change for Rell. Her W cooldown reduction was reduced by 2 seconds, and as a result, her overall win rate is up about 2% this patch. In high elo, it's up nearly 3%, and she's looking strong again off of a single buff. It's a crucial ability after all, and after seeing all these effects of a single buff, we moved Rel up to the A tier. Our OP picks are still Leona and Lulu, followed up by Thresh, Morgana, Nautilus, Blitzcrank, Maokai, Zara, Senna, and Yuumi in the S tier. That'll wrap up our mid-patch update for patch 11.15. Hope you guys all enjoyed it, and let me know what you guys thought in the comments below. Like always, I do encourage you to join our Discord using the link in the description. I'd love to see you guys there. Regardless, I wish you guys a great rest of your day, and best of luck on the remainder of this patch. I'll see you all in the next video, and as always, stay safe, stay healthy, and have a wonderful day. Peace.